Okay, hello, I think we can start. So this panel is detectives in manga, and it's basically my interpretation of the protagonists that detectives are, certain things that happen around them in particular way, and how it influences them, but also how they influence the plot. And I found a few things that I consider interesting, and I decided to share them with you. And of course, the choice of manga that I have here is personal, related to what I like. So at the end of the panel, I will have a slide with all the titles that I used, so you don't have to think about during the panel what was used, what wasn't. I will also have a before last slide with questions. So if you have any questions during the panel, please remember them or write them somewhere, and you can ask them at the end. But before that, I will just go through the whole thing. So the plan for this presentation will be first starting with what are the average detectives? What is the average Mr. Holmes, borrowing from Arthur Conan Doyle? What are the weaknesses? Because everybody is human, especially characters in manga, and what kind of... I found a few weaknesses that were kind of particularly sticking out there. Then we will see the helper that happens in pretty much every detective manga. So that each Mr. Holmes has a Dr. Watson, and we're going to see this kind of what kind of people they are, how they complement the detective, and what kind of dynamics happen there. Then we will see the mysterious cases that are also very fitting for our Mr. Holmes, and the enemies that they have to meet. And there not always is a formidable opponent, and there not always is this life-long enemy like Dr. Moriarty, but there is some kind of enemies that the detectives have to face. So let's start with the average Mr. Holmes and who can actually become detective in manga. What here points out as the important element to note. And let's have a short quiz. Who is a detective? So A, a police investigator, B, a private investigator, C, a high school student, or D, which is my favorite, none of the above really matter much. And because we have, of course, manga that have people from all of those first three zones, but the component that I find really important when picking who is a detective and who isn't, because we have detective manga with detective even in title, where those things that I consider important don't happen. So I would like to specify it as first, that the detective is a person involved in a criminal case who is actively trying to uncover the secrets and succeeds in solving the mystery. And what I mean here is that the detective is an active person. They are not trying to be swept away by the whole thing happening, or they aren't thrown around. There is a definitive moment when they take the case and control it or start unraveling it, and they have the power over the situation. In many cases where there is a mystery, there is a criminal case, the character still gets thrown around and just stumbles on the result, and then just comes out as like, oh, I didn't get killed, yay. But in here, the detective is very importantly an active character here. So in that way, we can include as detectives people who happen to be at the spot and they're not exactly related to it, but just happen to solve the mystery. But because we had those ABC, let's see the examples of ABC. And starting with a case of a police investigator, and what I found and picked here is Yakushiji Ryoko, who is really, really smart. She's a heir to a fortune and a big empire with a big company and so on, but she still wants to make a career. She's well educated and she's really fighting on the police. side and trying to get better and better positions, even though she doesn't have to, because she just has to wait till their parents just like, oh, you know, we're bored with running the company, you have it. So she's a person who actually actively tries to get what they want, and she's pretty unpredictable, but she still gets things done. And as you can see, she doesn't look like the standard police uniform kind of person, but she still manages to get in cases. On the other end, a bit opposite character, is Mariel Imari, who is very intelligent as well, but you can't see it right away because she's lazy, disorganized, then she solves some mystery for somebody, and instead of getting money for it, she gets bribed with alcohol and food. So, you know, well-solved case, but still doesn't get too much money out of that. And she also is unconventional, so she does this kind of weird schedule of sleeping till midday and solving cases during the night, and dresses in all kinds of different dress-ups to investigate scenes and so on. And our C, the last type of investigator and detective, is a high school student, and here I was thinking about Shinichi Kudo, who starts as a high school student, then gets into this very bad situation where he gets turned into a middle school student and still goes around solving cases with some electric gadgets helping him and so on. And again, he's very intelligent and very observant, so he just sees stuff and links those things together in some string of why these things could happen. So he has this kind of very fast mind connecting clues together. And he does all those things from hiding, and he wants to be like the new era Holmes. So he also like mentions it at the beginning, and well, he does pretty well. So let's recap in short for the detective types and the personality types. The detectives are people who are very smart, and they take action whenever they see a situation happen, and they try to solve it right away. They do not wait to die, which some characters do, but they are really active. And sometimes in some mangas, the detective happens to become a detective while there is an accident that happens to them. They are not exactly a detective that rushes into the scene and solves the mystery and everything. They kind of like arise to the occasion which happens around them. And sometimes they even happen to be in places where mysterious things happen, too often to be true, but that's another thing. So now that we have these average cases of Mr. Holmes, let's see what kind of weaknesses they have. And I picked here 6 examples, because perfect human beings are boring, and we usually don't try to have them in mangas. This is like at least one flaw per character is like requirement, unless they are like third plan or something and nobody cares about their character at all. And what is here also to note is that the sins that they commit are usually not well connected to the criminal cases. So many of the weaknesses that I will mention here are used for comic relief, not exactly for solving the cases that much. But it differs between the characters as well. So let's start with sloth and lust. Yakumo Saito is lazy as it can be. He sleeps all the time, and he would never solve any case unless his friends would not come in and say, you have to move your butt now. Or like the murder happens right next door or something and he has to solve it or something. So we can see him here sleeping, and this is his favorite activity. The other one is Kindaichi Hajime, who's very popular. There's a lot of volumes about his adventures. And here we see that he is trying to touch the boob of his friend Miyuki in midst of confusion, when they had a heartful moment of her being, oh, I haven't seen you so long, I thought you were lost. And then he grabs her boob. Just a moment. And this happens quite a lot. Most of the time, Hajime's circus behaviors consider Miyuki, but sometimes he's like thinking about those actresses or some handsome, pretty friend or something. So we can see him, you know, salviating around different girls from time to time. Now let's see some pride and gluttony. So we have Yakushiji Ryoko, which I already mentioned before. As I said, she's unconventional. She wears different clothing than a police officer should. And she's the kind of person that believes the world revolves around her and everything should fit into her schedule, including the crimes, because if the crime is stretching too much and she's investigating longer hours and she forgot to record a TV show, she's like irritated because this shouldn't happen. Her favorite TV show is on, right? So she just charges into the scene and says like, I'm the best ever here. It's like pride to the max. And then we have Seiya Takano, who's glutton, and a glutton to the level where he enters the crime scene into the house of the victim, and there are like corpses lying around. He goes to the fridge, he starts taking out the food from the fridge, setting it on the table, hitting all the dishes, and eating it there. And if it wasn't that after eating all of those things and describing how well they taste, like you can see the description here, he actually solves the case using the food as a reference and a reason. But this is like really roundabout way, and I'm not sure all the cases would be so easy to solve if they were all related to food only. Like, they were eating really fatty food, and this is why one of the characters had a heart attack. It wasn't a murder. Yes, that's what happened. Now, for two last ones, I have Wrath and Envy, and for Wrath, I have Kurobai Yo, who is... He's not aggressive in physical sense, but he's as sadistic as he can get. And I have later a particular example of sadistic, but he just treats his assistant with some sadistic pleasures. He even humiliates the perpetrators in public, which is like, really? And then he's like, I'm not going to turn you in. I want to play with you. And then we have Narumi Ayumu, who's really good detective. He's really smart, but then he has this problem of being the second in the family. His older brother, Gyotaka, already managed to take everything from him, like get all the best prizes, all the best positions, marry the woman that Ayumu is also in love with, and then disappeared. And then Ayumu is like, what the hell am I gonna do here? It's like, I can't do anything, you know? Everything is already done. And he's just like doing almost the same stuff, and then he notices like, yeah, I would do the same thing right now as my brother, but he already did it, there's no point. So he's like trying to navigate his life, being envious of his brother being the first one. So a very short recap, because it's pretty obvious that detectives are very much like manga protagonists. They have faults, and that is what makes them interesting as characters as well. So it's important that they have this kind of fault. You might also notice that I didn't manage to find greed, and if it was, that would be 7 deadly sins. It's kind of hard to fit in greed, because most cases when a detective is greedy, they are also very poor. So I'm giving them a break on that. But let's see what is the other person working with our detective and fulfilling the duo, or being the opposite and a helper. And really, do all detectives work in pairs? Because it seems like they do. Like, I've gone through quite a few titles, and the only cases when they work alone is usually when the partner just died or something. There's usually like this other character that has to be there to fill in and to complete the detective that we have. And what is the average Watson for our Holmes? So there is very often opposite gender, and there is some tension or some kind of suspected romance or something. Very ripe material for fan fiction. So there is a lot of fan fiction coming out of that. And the Watson becomes very often this kind of relatable character, because the detective in this story is super smart. They know crazy things. They can really turn over in their heads all of the elements of the mystery. But then, what is it that those cogs in the detective's head are turning at? Why is the mystery going this way or that? So the Watson is very often that person that comes in and asks the question, what is going on? Why did this happen? And in the natural way, the mangaka can create this kind of flow of information of showing why is this happening and how this dynamic works and how the whole case works. Which is, of course, can be like extended to further reaches like in Death Note, but let's not go there. Because the level of logic we have in the second half of Death Note is just way too over the top. But the other functions that Dr. Watson has is this kind of trouble generation and finding cases, because it's kind of hard to imagine like how does it happen that the detective will stumble upon a case after case after case, and it's like a series of events. So having this Watson who sometimes comes in like, yeah, I heard about a murder, let's go and see it, is this kind of element that can kind of excuse the situation that the cases happen so often. And there is this happening, but not as always, as often, that the Watson is actually a support on the same level as the Mr. Holmes, because there is not that many mangas where the Watson actually is not a copy, not a stupid tag-along, but rather a person that finds also clues and also reasons some things and shows the level of intelligence equal to Mr. Holmes. And this is kind of like also noticeable that, well, it's like there has to be somebody dumb in the manga so you can have some kind of explanations that sound natural. But yeah. So let's see a few examples, and starting with a romantic couple is Kuze and Fuyuki. And you can see this 5 there. I'm not really good at photoshopping, so it's still there. This is the cover of the 5th volume, and they're still going. So it's quite a few volumes, and Kuze and Fuyuki have this dynamic that they never kiss exactly or never really admit to each other that they have romantic relationship, but it's so charged all the time. And then there is these moments when somebody gets drunk or somebody is sleepy and hugs the other person, and they get this like, how can he do that so easily? Or how can she do that so easily? And but they are both police investigators, and they are both on a similar level of cooperating with each other. So they are working together and they are solving the cases together, and both of them have this kind of equal almost contribution in how the case progresses. And they are solving cases in a way that basically, if they weren't together, they probably wouldn't solve many cases as well as they did. Now let's see the more efficient couple where the romance is more tuned down, because with Kuze and Fuyuki it's like so charged, it's the first thing you pretty much see. But in case of Ayumu and Hiono, Hiono is very smart, and she is this kind of intelligence bank, so she collects a lot of information for Ayumu, and she just sometimes comes in, and because the investigation that they're both doing is dangerous, she sometimes ends up in a situation where she could actually die or be, well, you know, quite a lot hurt. She still manages to match the pace of Ayumu and help him in many situations. So it's not like she's just, you know, getting tagged along and by a shoestring or something and just sitting there. But let's see what the tag-along relationship is like. And we have here Neuro and Yako. And Neuro is actually a demon, and that's not a spoiler, that's like first chapter ever in that manga. And he's basically using various demon tools and his intelligence to find out mysterious murder cases and then investigate them and solve them. And Yako is actually this human agent who he's using as this kind of fake detective as his cover. So she's the one supposedly solving the cases and supposedly explaining everything and finding all the tricks, but it's basically most of the time Neuro. And a lot of the time Yako is the one who's like, what does this mean? I have no idea what's going on. And Neuro is explaining things to her, so she's the one who's actually getting schooled. And well, she gets intelligent over the way slowly, but a lot of the time she's the one who's being treated as the last idiot on earth. Now, let's see in short. Every detective gets a partner. It's a must. And these cases that I showed you are basically of partnerships that run through pretty much the whole manga. But there are mangas there, like Kuitan, where the assistant is just some random person that got assigned, and they are just there to ask the questions, because sometimes the cases are mysterious and they require very silly knowledge and very silly details to even understand and solve them. And let's see what kind of cases there are and why the Holmes has to have certain amount and certain array of skills to even touch them and solve them. Because some are really magically attracted to the detective. So let's solve first this case attraction thing. How does it happen that the detective goes on holiday and there is a murder in the onsen? And then another murder in the onsen. And then the detective is like, well, hell, I cannot go anywhere, anything. This is actually not that often that they are aware that they are like this magnet for all the cases. Especially like Hajime, Kindaichi Hajime, he goes on trips here, on trips there, he's on some circles in school, then he helps some detective. He just goes on holidays somewhere and murder case, murder case, murder case, serial murder, serial murder. It's like all the time, and he's never aware of it. And on the other end, we have, for example, Shishigami Takeshi-kun, who is his first meeting with a murder case was in high school, and everybody was like laughing at Shishigami, sounds like Shinigami. And this actually happens, like everybody starts calling him after that, after the first murder case. Then he becomes a private investigator. And then in the first volume of the manga, where he's a private investigator, he gets convinced to go to onsen trip. And, you know, the murder occurs, and then he's in the corner like, why does this have to happen when I want to go anywhere? Why even on holidays? Is it something that about me? Do I kill people when I'm there? So this is like a very rare case of understanding their own situation. In all the other cases, it's just trying to kind of excuse it by adding maybe more characters, like because the detective was invited to this trip by somebody they just met recently, that murder case is totally a random event. Totally. Not even it's like 5th time in a row that they get invited by somebody they met recently and there is another murder case again. But let's backtrack a bit, because from point of view of the manga and from the plot, it seems like the character arrives at the scene, there is like a while of seeing the area and getting acquainted with people, and then bam, a murder case. But the fact is that the murder case has deep roots. There isn't like that murder is completely unconnected to the past and it's just starting now. So there is a long history and a long list of reasons and a long list of plans and everything. And what's very important here is that the detective is an outsider. The murder case is something that they stumble on, but with the outsider status being somebody completely not related to it, they are very rarely suspected. So most detective stories are where detective is not suspected, and because of that, they can just enter the scene like, hello, I'm a private detective, or hello, this is my police badge, and hello, my grandfather was the greatest detective ever living, and now I'm going to solve this case for ya. And people are like, yeah, sure, please do. So yeah, the detective gets this kind of neutral position of a judge. They're not related to most of the characters, they're not related to the whole setting. And there is also this kind of moral high ground for case solving for them, that they can just go and question everyone, they can go and suspect everything, and they go around and discuss everything. And the investigation that our Holmes has to go through is very often investigating the past, the deep things that have been stewing around for a really long time. And to get the big picture, they have to use this obscure knowledge to solve puzzles. And here we have this example of dividing the bodies to multiply them. So you basically cut the bodies in a certain way. This is here shown on dolls, so no bloody bodies yet. And they are cut in the way that you can shuffle a bit around some pieces. And it doesn't seem like any of the dolls is missing much. Here a leg, there an arm, here some pelvis, a belly or something. But most of them resemble a human body more or less, except when you start thinking that this kind of mathematics of bodies has been used in more than one case I've seen. And very often it's like a young teenage girl who's supposedly the one who cut up the bodies of other people to make it look like she was one of the victims. So aside from really big mathematic knowledge and really understanding of the puzzles, all the criminals seem to be going through this special school for physical education so they can cut up all the bodies. But what is here is that this is one of the mediocre examples. There was a few others that I couldn't find for you, but the understanding how the criminal has committed the murder sometimes involves some kind of crazy understanding of how to ferment already ready wine, how to do some kind of weird trick with a big roll of tape that will move while the TV, while the cinema is showing a movie, is to pull a piece of tape and attach the keys to it to create this closed room murder. It's like, you look at it and you could never, ever think about it. Like, this case could be solved in 1,000 other ways, and it's this kind of, most of the detectives have this kind of weird bank of knowledge of obscure things that nobody would expect, especially used in practice. So let's see as average Kindaichi case, because Kindaichi has this kind of over-the-top things, and if you ever go to reading Kindaichi, it's pretty good, but they like to repeat themselves. So if you ever see in the first chapter that they go through any bridge and it's said that this is like the best way to get to outside, it will burn in like second chapter. After the first body drops, of course. So, you know, it's like that they find the first body and it's woo, and they see the smoke from the bridge. So this is standard. And then, of course, there is this very easy explanation that, like, there is somebody hiding in the closet, and it's not us, and that's the murder. Of course not. The murder is one of the people who's walking around and, you know, they're finding all the ways to double back to seem like they always have a reason and the body has been killed in some other way without their intervention at all. And at least in Kindaichi, what it seems is like he always stumbles on somebody's revenge plan, and the revenge has to be that 5 people get killed or something, and they just drop like flies, one after another. And knowing about this revenge plan is what brings us to knowing that for each Mr. Holmes, there is a formidable Dr. Moriarty. Of course, if we have something like, Kindaichi case files, there will be like Moriarty every 5 chapters. So that's why I'm saying that the analogy is like almost fitting. And there is also a thing that is good to mention is that the perpetrators are humans. Very often. Well, I'm listing a few mangas which have ghosts and stuff, but what is important is that there are flaws and there is always some kind of breadcrumb trail to find the perpetrator, and the detective usually stumbles and just, like a duck, for the breadcrumb trail and finds everything out. And what is the most interesting case? Because there are cases where there is theft, there are cases where there is some kind of other crime, but the most important and most interesting is always the murder case. So most of these very, very detective stories go around with murder cases. And murder is actually pretty heavy, especially have more than one body. And very, very rarely this is done with this kind of crazy perpetrator type who has no motive at all. The motives are, in short, very often getting rich, getting revenge, and getting secrets, staying secrets. And of course, the getting rich, gaining something, inheritance, money, some kind of house, some kind of treasure hidden somewhere, those things are kind of interesting, but we always kind of know, like, the perpetrator is just greedy. So we can have this trail of murdering for money, but there will be some kind of stuff going on. And very often, at least in Kindaichi, we will have this kind of hidden knowledge that turns out that, yeah, that won't go as you would like, and ending up in the prison is actually one of the least things you should be worried about. So here we have a case of inheritance murder, and well, it turns out that there were some facts about the family that the perpetrator didn't know, and this will haunt them for the rest of their lives. Horrible, horrible. But what I'm actually interested the most in here is the revenge by vigilante justice. And this is, the revenge by vigilante justice is very, very important because in previous case, the perpetrator is just greedy. That's like, of course, yeah, sure, I understand, but you could also get a job. In this case, the perpetrator is not necessarily a bad person. They might have been failed by the justice system. And in here, I mean the situations when somebody's like, yeah, my family has been killed by some people or some kind of malpractice. There were never enough proofs to condemn these people. They never got a sentence, or there was some kind of corruption in the government. And the perpetrator is stuck in a situation when they would really like to see the people who have committed something really bad be jailed or something, but it's never going to happen. So after something like 5, 10, 20 years, they decide to take it in their own hands. So this is especially tragic because here the perpetrator is pushed to commit the crime and is basically a person who's just been suffering for years for stuff. And this is where the moral high ground of the detective is important, because since the detective came into the scene and has found all the people arranged there and arranged in some order, friends, enemies, and cooperators and whatnot, they are outsider enough that they can kind of judge the motives, judge the criminals, judge the relations between people But usually when we have this kind of murder case and there are friends involved in it, they will start accusing each other over everything, and the detective will be like, hey, 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 stop, don't do anything rash, we're not trying to do here anything bad, and we have to be calm and discuss it. And this is important because the detective uncovers the motive, uncovers everything about the crime, and does it basically publicly. So everybody who's there learns about the reasons, learns about the way, learns about who gets killed and why, and usually the criminal breaks down and starts crying or just admits to it. It's like, yes, I did it and I do not regret it. But the judgment is usually over the deed and the method. The judgment is not over the person. So here we have a piece of, that's from right to left, from a Japanese comic. So there is a guy who was basically bribed into getting some other guy into prison, which started a whole long story of murder, revenge, and so on. And the guy was basically in a very tight situation. His wife had cancer, and he needed money to cure her. And the detective here is admitting that the motive is a valid and a tragic situation, and then bashes the guy for the way he did solve around this, that the fact that he was getting some other guy into prison by and getting money for it from somebody else is a bad thing to do, but it's also that it's a result of a tragic situation. And eventually we can see that there is this sympathy for those people that is driven by the understanding that there is no black and white. While the criminal pretty much deserves being jailed for committing crime, the perpetrators of the previous crimes, now victims or the people who died, have deserved also some kind of punishment. And here we have a panel from Kindaichi where he visits a lady who murdered people as a revenge for something that was also really, really emotional and really strong. And she planned it all in cold blood because these people really deserved death according to her. And she gets jailed, but he visits her in prison and he tries to make her understand that, well, the situation is not as hopeless, that she did try to do something for the people who died on her side and resolve her feelings. So this was really helpful to cleanse for the perpetrator as well. But this is like, I said this is like not all mangas do that. So there are mangas also who go to completely other spectrum. And in Kuro no Tantei, Kuroba goes all out and finds out the motive. It's like, yeah. And he just bashes out the perpetrator in the first chapter, especially, all the way. And this is when you're like, poor guy, he's not only going to prison, his whole life is completely destroyed. Really. And the poor guy just tried to get a secret, kept secret, and it's totally a crime of passion. But this guy was went all out, destroyed the guy's life, and everything. So there are, of course, detectives that go like this. There is always some kind of exception to the rules. So in the conclusion, the detectives that we have, they come in all stages of life and all stages in employment. And this is, of course, related to the fact that mangas are created for people in all stages of life and all stages in employment, and we would like to have characters that are at least relatable for them. So we will have the teenagers, we will have grown-ups in mangas and so on. So this is partially related to the fact that manga is just very varied as a communication mean. But the detectives themselves are very interesting people. They are imperfect, they have faults, and they have always somebody with them. So they are not completely alone when they are doing things, and they are able to fight crimes because of this help that they have. And they are the active people in any case. So they are fighting and they are doing things to not to be completely overrun by the situation. And in many cases, the investigation shows that the world is not black and white. And it's especially important because characters and stories where the world is black and white are usually very unrealistic. In the real world, there will be motives that are very deeply seated. There will be reasons, there will be characters that are not completely perfect, and there will be some kind of reason why the crime is committed. Not in the way of, well, yeah, you know, I was just didn't have enough money for that MacBook or something, and I felt I would just kill that guy and get the money. Usually there is a bit more than that. So this is actually all what I had in here, but now I actually have quite a lot of time for discussion. So is there anybody who wants to ask a question or has a comment about the panel?
What is your opinion about cases that can't be solved by the reader? For example, in Neuro, a lot of the evidence is only shown after the perpetrator is being announced or prosecuted or stuff like that.
Yeah, there is this fine line, and there are cases that you just can't follow them. You're basically passive in the whole story, and yeah, I'm not really a fan of those, because then you're like just, yeah, it's a show, but you cannot engage intellectually in there at all. But at the same time, you have this different level of engagement that the manga is trying to bring you in, because you have cases where the whole thing is kind of, there are cues here and there, like in Kindaichi, he notices things here and there, and they are important to the story, but you don't always have this kind of full indication of what does it mean, because it could mean many things. So of course, if you have somebody who's really intelligent and they follow, or they have this kind of a detective-like way of thinking about things, because this is something that you just have to have in your head, this kind of way of navigating things and finding out the right reasons for things, then you kind of notice that, yeah, there is some things, and you can afterwards, when the way that the murder was committed, like you can relate these things, that, yeah, there was this kind of thing mentioned before, so yes, this is how it's related. But at the same time, if you have a manga that will go right to the lower level, so it will basically not only point these things out, but also show like thoughts of the detective, or we will have this another person that's stupid and asks the questions, and we get this kind of process. Sometimes those mangas get to really low levels, like you get things explained that you think that's like, yeah, this is obvious and very simple, you didn't have to explain it to me. But the problem is that it's really hard to kind of point out where is the border between those, because you have different readers. So this is also the problem with noticing of how much it can be explained. But also what is, I notice, important is that the mystery wouldn't grip you as much when you're reading it if it didn't have a moment when there is something revealed still that you didn't know exactly. So you basically keep being interested in trying to solve it in your head until the moment comes when, well, okay, that's the missing puzzle, and it gets explained in this kind of great reveal, you are the perpetrator. So, yeah, there is this kind of, and I would guess that it's better if you have some kind of pointers going along the way, rather than have it all clumped at the end, because then you're just like watching the interactions between the characters, but they don't mean that much to you. So at least some kind of relations and pointers. But yeah, it's basically each manga has its style on that. Any other questions? Any other comments? Well, I can still use the time that are you interested in me going over the titles? Because there is quite a few titles that I used, and well, they were there in certain stages of it. So the first manga that we have here is Detective Conan, and this is about our bright high schooler turned middle schooler detective who basically tries to find out people who turned him into a kid while solving different cases and helping this totally unusable police detective who's like his uncle. And well, the Detective Conan manga is like over 40 volumes now, and it's, I think, still going on. So it's one of those monsters that you're like, this is basically the status quo, that he's a kid and he will never ever grow up or turn himself adult. And he still has like this lost love who's happening to be around all the time but never knows that he's this kid. So there is this kind of tension going on. And it's very episodic, so there is this kind of main motive of him being turned into a kid, but then there is these cases that he pops in, solves from time to time. Then there is Forget Me Not by Tsuruta Kenji, and this is basically this kind of short manga with a pretty high quality art happening in Viennese. So this is pretty international in the character, and there is a lot of this kind of reference to culture and so on. The character is this lazy Mariel Imari who I introduced in the beginning. And it basically revolves around her trying to be a detective, which everybody around her feels that she's not properly like a detective, but she actually does quite a good job. Then we have Kindaichi Shonen, and Kindaichi is this perverted guy I mentioned before, coping a feel on his friend Miyuki. And he is this grand son to this great, best ever detective. And there is also a lot of different titles. The main title is this, but there is a few volumes that were separately released with these subtitles of different cases. But this is very episodic. This is the guy who basically goes to every friggin' trip, and there will be always a buddy, and that buddy will always be some kind of revenge plan on somebody, or some kind of other motive, and he goes around investigating the whole thing. And solves different cases. There is also one smaller sub-volume where there are no murder cases really, just this kind of almost murder cases or misunderstood cases and so on. But most of the time Kindaichi just stumbles from dead body to dead body. Then we have Kesshaku Tohanka 007, and this is the couple that was romantically charged when I was showing. So this is a few volumes of two police investigators solving different cases, and it's slightly psychic, so one of the characters is a psychic and they solve the cases with some kind of magic psychic abilities happening. And yeah, I would say that the drawings are pretty decent, so at least that, if not for the fact that the knowledge you can read there is not useful at any point. Then we have Kuitan, and this is about this guy who just enters the perpetrator's, the victim's house, takes out food from the fridge and starts eating it. And the whole chapters are episodic stories where he's invited by people as this re-owned detective to solve the criminal case of murder, and he just eats his time through it, explaining all the motives, all the evidence and so on based on food. Then we have Kuro no Tantei, which is about Kurobayo, this sadistic guy who would just go around revealing murder motives and taunting the perpetrators, and then being very sadistic towards his own assistant and so on. Here we have this especially example that the assistant is basically an idiot, so he needs explaining, but he's trying to help around. Then we have Majin Timete no Gami Neuro. This also has an anime, so I'm guessing that this in here anime is a bit more well known, but manga is longer than anime and goes on about certain things longer. So I recommend that if you've ever seen the anime. And this is basically about no Gami Neuro, who's a demon. I didn't know that demons had surnames and names. But he comes to the human world because his food are mysteries. So he goes around solving mysteries so he can eat them. He's like another example of being really, really big glutton, but you know, I only put one example and Kuitan really trumps that. Then we have Shinigami Tantei to Yurei Gakuen, and this is this Shishigami kun who happened to stumble upon murder case in his high school, and then he just tries to get rid of this Shinigami nickname but becomes a private investigator. And Shinigami Tantei to Yusu Onsen, it's basically him being a private investigator and just going on holidays and happening to have a murder case in the onsen. And this is basically the only case where out of this list where the detective is actually self-aware of his ability to attract mysteries. Then we have Shinrei Tantei Yakumo, which is this is a bit more into ghosts and stuff. So there is a guy who sees ghosts, is super lazy, but still gets to solve many mysteries. This is based on, I believe, a light novel, and then there is a live action, and there is anime, so this is actually pretty big. And there are 2 mangas made, so the main author, Kaminaga, is the same guy, but then the mangaka is different. In the first case is Oda, in the second case is Miyako, and Yakumei Tantei, Shinrei Tantei Yakumo, I have a typo, I'm sorry. Akai Hitomi wa Shitteru is actually complete manga, and the other one is still, I think, releasing. So if you want to look for it, you can find out. And these are both basically episodic, so you have the same main characters stumbling all the time, and then you have all the cases that they get involved in. And they're actually pretty long cases, so there are a few volumes of those. Then we have Spiral, Suiri no Kizuna, the Bonds of Reasoning. And Spiral is here the one there is just one case, and the whole manga of 15 volumes is about that one case. And this is with Narumi, who is Ayumu, who is trying to follow his brother's footsteps and solve a terrible, terrible criminal case. And this is one of those cases where there is really a lot of random knowledge which you wouldn't know until the case is resolved or the trick is explained. So in here you're like, they had some kind of weird schooling. Why didn't I have this knowledge in high school at all? And then last one we have Yakushiji Ryoko no Kaiki Jikenbo, which is again with some ghosts and some special characters and some kind of monsters coming around. But Yakushiji Ryoko is this arrogant character that just comes into the scene and starts solving it by being charismatic and demanding that people finish murdering so she can go home and watch her favorite TV show. So that will be it for the mangas. Is there any more questions?
Do you have a favorite out of those?
A favorite out of those? There is actually a couple of them. I would say Neuro is really good because of it actually stretches quite long, but the manga is more satisfying than the anime because it has actually more motives. Spiral is pretty good. It's also like this 15 volumes of intense stuff, but it has quite a reasonable, intelligent characters. But the whole premise is like some crazy bio-engineering cloning thing happening, so there is also this. Forget Me Not from Short Ones is really interesting because the fact that it's actually not happening in Japan, it's Viennese, and also the fact that the art is really decent. So from 2 volumes there is quite a few color pages, which you have a really nice quality of drawings for them. So it's mostly watercolor, this kind of stuff. So those are pretty good. Then Yakumo would be pretty decent if it was all out, because it's basically kind of waiting for all of those. And I guess the most interesting out of those would be light novel, but I didn't manage to get my hands on it. Well, from classics here, then Detective Conan is really classic. There is an anime to that, there is the volumes, but it's so endless. It's really long, and there is at the beginning you think that maybe the status quo will solve itself at some point, but no. It's basically like Ranma, all the time the same thing all over again. In similar thing is with Kindaichi, who is doing like this most classic type of detective stories with closed room mysteries all over all the time. And there is volumes all the time coming out, but it's just, if you feel like reading something like that, I would guess after a few volumes you might get bored. So unless you have like this break every few volumes, like 2 years or something, so you get to forget this whole scheme. But it's basically like this. The tricks are sometimes slightly repeated, but it's like, there is a bridge, yeah, it will burn, yeah, it's burning. Yeah, there is a closed room. Yeah, there will be some way to put that keys inside the pockets and make it seem like it was a closed room, but actually it wasn't, and so on. So the whole thing was like, yeah, very much repeated. That's why that Shinigami Tantei to Yutsu Onsen is refreshing, because the main character actually sits in the corner and gets depressed, like, again, there is a murder case, and I was just here. I didn't even want anything like that to happen. So it's a bit different dynamic based on that. From these, the animes that I would suggest, like Neuro, yeah, if you don't have time for manga, you can read, you can watch the anime because it's shorter. Then Yakumo has a really decent anime because it's shorter, kind of more condensed than the mangas, and they're still going out. But there is also like, not really proper solution to everything, because it's also like just a guy sitting around in a room and getting cases. Yakushiji Ryoko actually has a more polished a bit anime than the manga, and it's more a complete thing than the manga. But I guess it might have this kind of relation of prequel-sequel with the manga as well. But yeah, the drawings in the manga are a bit more like this fast sketch type, and the anime is actually, well, full color and everything, like all the lines are closed and everything. So, well, that would be it. Do you have any more questions? Yes?
Have you read Remote? Where actually the main character is the silly sidekick. It's a normal policewoman, and the really smart Holmes type detective is only a supporting character.
Okay, so
I think it has 5 or 6 volumes. The art is quite rough, but the story is actually quite good.
so what was the name again?
Remote.
Remote. So a manga with.
Yeah, it's a manga, but there is also a drama made based on the story with star actors and actresses. And I think it was made in the. It's maybe 10, 15 years old, something like that. It's not that old, but.
Okay, so 10, 15 years old manga and drama about a character with a policewoman that's just regular character, and there is this Holmes smart guy who's a supporting character.
The setting is turned around, so the city sidekick is the main character.
Okay. Well, I haven't seen it, that I must admit. But does that sound like Inspector Gadget kind of setting?
No, not at all.
Not Inspector Gadget.
A lot more realistic.
Okay, well,
So
yeah,
there's,
if...
nothing like that, so no gadgets or nothing.
But thinking about it, that Inspector Gadget is basically an idiot, and the person who's solving is his niece, all the time walking around, and he's the one who's like the main character and the poster boy of the whole series, and she's the one going solving.
No, not at all. So it's okay. Basically, yes, but the setting is still really different. So you really can compare those two.
Okay, then I will have to check it out. Well, there are some detective mangas like Psychometer Eiji, where we have the main character is well, not exactly, because Psychometer Eiji has this main character Eiji who's a psychometer, like the manga title says, and he basically touches things and finds out clues. But he has a actual policewoman who's walking around with him and solving the cases, and she's the smart one. He's just a perverted boy who's trying to cope a feel or find her panties or something. So, the fact is also that in the panel I didn't really include those cases when you have a detective that's more in the background, because you also have mangas where the main characters are just doing something and then they have some case and then there are detectives coming in, because usually the most interesting are the ones where detectives are the main characters and the forefront of the horror story.
And actually there was also other work I was thinking about. It's made by Kindaichi. So the art is really, really good. It's maybe one of the best you can find in any manga. It's called Season Life. So it tells a story about a father suffering from cancer, and he only has a short while of time to try to solve the mystery of the murder of his own daughter. So it's a really dark and sad story, but it's really well made. It's quite short, but I really say that you should read it, because the art and the story both are first class. So it's one of the best detective stories I've read.
So
Even though the main character is not a professional at all, so it's a normal guy try to figure out how to solve a mystery.
okay, what was the title again?
It's Season Life. So
Season Life.
Yeah, that's right, and it's made by Kindaichi,
Okay.
who has also made Ziban, which is quite a well-known manga, so you should find it quite easy.
Okay.
But it's not been published in West, but there is a fun translation available.
Okay.
But the remote I mentioned earlier, that was published by Tokyopop a few years back, so
Okay.
you might be able to find it if you want the printed copy in English.
Okay, yeah. Well, does anybody have any comments or questions still? Well, I guess we can end the panel at this. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you for all the questions and comments.